Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director. Today we are privileged to have a truly exceptional business executive who, having completed a highly successful career at a number of corporations like Litton and TRW, became CEO of Northrop Grumman. Finishing that, he decided he still wanted to stay busy and become chairman of Uber Technologies, a director of Apple Inc. and Amgen Technologies. And of course, we could not ask for anyone better, equipped to talk to us about the future environment of our civilization. It is this gentleman. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege to introduce Dr. Ron Sugar.
Thank you, Cindy and Mike. What a treat to be down here today. I actually have to confess to you, I have never been here before, and I can't believe that I haven't, and I realized that as soon as I came here, this is where I should have been many times before. What a great legacy we have. Thank you very much for having me this morning. I've learned that you have a long history of distinguished celebrity speakers. I'm not sure you got a celebrity today, but you got a speaker, hopefully. And I will apologize for the fact that being an old retired guy without a graphics department, you're going to have to actually listen to me tell you a campfire story as opposed to looking at a bunch of PowerPoints with 30 lines of text on them. So hopefully I'll spare you that part of it. It's also wonderful to see a few old friends here in the audience, some people I worked with and other people that I didn't work directly with, but I knew. So anyway, look, today I would like to maybe not talk about airplanes, but to talk about technology and give some examples of where it's been and maybe speculate a little bit with you about where it's going and how it might affect our lives and our civilization. So first, let me set the stage and let me take you on a journey from the past. A journey of how a young entrepreneur found a way to use some of the new technologies of his day to revolutionize the way we all now go places and get things, and how his remarkable innovation went on to spark a real shift in the global economy. Let me ask you to imagine a world where you can summon a ride, book a homestay, or get a meal delivered all with a few taps on your mobile phone. Seems so normal now, doesn't it? Well, even I, as a technology guy, have to pinch myself that it's actually possible, and it actually works, and it works at scale, and it works everywhere in the world. I've often wondered, how did this new normal come to be? What allowed it to happen? And what might be the verge of what we're going to see next? Well, back in 2008, a young man named Garrett Camp was a 30-year-old Canadian-born tech entrepreneur living in San Francisco. Like most of us back then, Garrett was frustrated with his city's taxi services. Long wait times, unreliable service, surly drivers, and frequently unavailable taxis were very common problems. One Friday evening, he tried to find a taxi with no luck. Then he tried to call a more expensive high-end limo service, again with no luck. Having founded a couple of startup software companies in his 20s, Garrett Camp was no stranger to innovation. Surely there must be a way to create a seamless, on-demand transportation system, maybe a better alternative to traditional taxis and limos. After all, Apple had just introduced the iPhone just the year before that, and the smartphone revolution seemed to be taking effect. By March of 2009, Camp and his friend Travis Kalanick decided to co-found a little new company called Uber Cab, whose name was later shortened to simply Uber. Their company was based on the concept that a new software app could empower ordinary users to request a ride with just a few taps on the phone, automatically connecting them with nearby drivers, and therefore be able to handle all the payments electronically. Taxi drivers began to get the app. Even black car limo drivers found it compelling, as they found it a way to fill their downtime with additional trips between their normal rides. However, the road to success was, to use a phrase, pretty bumpy. As Uber caught on in new cities, it faced new regulatory hurdles, opposition from traditional taxi companies, opposition from local politicians, opposition from organized labor, and other cultural obstacles. Imagine, for example, the cultural leap of faith back then with the idea of you getting into some random car that just pulled up, driven by a total stranger. Who would do such a thing? But the Uber team persevered, believing in their vision, and despite all headwinds and significant controversy, Uber grew rapidly, first in the United States and around the world. And speaking of headwinds, when COVID hit, 90% of Uber's rideshare business disappeared. The company had to figure out, how do we innovate around that to still survive? And they came up with the idea that maybe people were not going out to restaurants, but maybe they want to order food in. So what if we took our technology and our smart tech guys and improvised a way to provide delivery of food, hence Uber Eats. And over time, Uber Eats grew to the point where today Uber Eats is larger than Uber Rides, something that people don't realize. But fast forwarding today, Uber now provides rides, meals, grocery delivery, freight services in over 70 countries, over 10,000 cities. It powers 1 million rides and deliveries every hour, 24 hours a day, and this last year did 10 billion rides. The Uber app now has over 150 million monthly active users. And the app is now arguably the single largest source of work for people in the world. It's created jobs for more than 7 million drivers and couriers. That's more people than live in countries like Denmark or Singapore. The company today generates over 140 billion of annual gross bookings and has a market capitalization 3 times greater than that of General Motors. So during the past decade of this technology-enabled disruption, a number of other companies like Airbnb, DoorDash, Postmates, and many others also flourished and helped create a new kind of economy, a so-called sharing economy, based on sharing underutilized assets like our personal cars and our homes, and in the process enabled a totally new kind of employment model on a global scale, flexible work, or as it is now sometimes called, the gig economy. So how did Uber and these other companies come to revolutionize transportation and other industries and totally upend the traditional industries? What was it that suddenly made all this possible? I believe it was the result of a remarkable convergence of several factors that came together back then. First, it started with the economic conditions of the day. The 2008-2009 recession left millions of Americans seeking extra income and more affordable services. Low interest rates at that time also fueled an abundance of investment capital, which could be directed to new, risky, and innovative business ideas. Second, in this economic recession, while people were stretched thin, they found themselves sitting on expensive but underused personal assets, as I mentioned, like their cars and their homes. Wouldn't it be amazing if ordinary people could use technology to monetize these assets to create new income streams for them and their families, and provide more affordable alternatives at the same time to the existing services that others could use? Third, all this was happening right at the very moment when smartphones and the mobile internet were just taking flight. With smartphones came the advent of super friendly user apps. Here's a funny story here. Back then, in the early days, Uber managers realized that the potential drivers were all using old Nokia phones. They needed to be able to use smartphones to be able to effectively drive Uber because they had to be connected to the platform. So the managers of Uber would go out and buy bagfuls, literally bagfuls of iPhones, and give them away to recruit new drivers so that they would come work on the platform. Fourth, GPS and digital maps are also becoming widely available. and they could help efficiently guide drivers to pick up riders and then deliver them to their destinations. Next, there was the creation of mobile online payment systems that could make individual financial transactions secure and cashless, which was important. Sixth, there was a tremendous innovation in creating trust mechanisms like driver and passenger background checks and rating systems, along with vehicle tracking, onboard cameras, and other techniques to ensure better safety and quality of the experience. And finally, and this is the underestimated secret sauce of Uber and other apps, data analytics and machine learning. Those are the terms we use there. Today we call it AI, but it's the same thing. And it was being used here over the last decade to move from the realm of the research lab to real-world applications. This allowed the prediction of user needs better and optimized pricing, optimized service, and optimized deployment of millions of drivers to make sure they're in the right place. So all these remarkable factors converged more than a decade ago and have since enabled some very smart and innovative folks to rapidly scale young Garrett Camp's novel idea from what was then a local service to now a global operation on enormous scale. And in the process, to change the way we all live and work. Quite a story. But wait, there's more. I thought we could spend a few more minutes to contemplate the profound changes that might be in store for us next. There are literally dozens of exciting new technologies that will be coming soon, or in fact are already upon us. Let me start first with an obvious one and a continuation of the ride-sharing story I just discussed. It will be the widespread introduction of autonomous self-driving vehicles. Today, there are perhaps a dozen companies around the world seriously investing in this important technology, aiming to reduce costs and also improve the safety of personal mobility. Creating this new technology to navigate complex urban environments without human drivers is an enormously challenging technical problem. And I might add, having been at Northrop and having built over 120,000 unmanned air vehicles and drones, creating an unmanned driving car that really works and doesn't hurt people is an even more challenging problem than designing aerial drones. In time, the world will likely see a hybrid environment of both driver-operated and driverless cars. And ride-sharing networks like Uber will likely also be a hybrid of both kinds of vehicles. Today, for example, you can see prototype Waymo vehicles on the streets of San Francisco, even a few down here in LA now. In Phoenix, Arizona, Uber is working with Waymo and has put 18 self-driving Waymo cars on the Uber network, so you can call an Uber and you can decide, do I want to get into one that's self-driving or do I want a real driver? And by the way, I've had experience doing this, and you get into the self-driving car and you look around and you wait for the driver to get in and he doesn't get in. You're basically sitting there saying, what's happening next? Then it says, please fasten your seatbelt. Oh, okay, I'll fasten my seatbelt. And then it starts. And for the first 5 minutes, you're like, holy cow. And you're holding on and you're white knuckle. After the next 5 minutes, you're looking at your iPhone and you're basically scrolling and surfing and you're not paying attention. Then it says, you've reached your destination and please leave. So amazing, the experience. So the transition will continue to bring challenges, of course. There'll be regulatory hurdles in every city, and there will be concerns about job displacement, because no sooner do you create a platform that employs 7 million people than you're going to now worry about the fact that driverless cars won't need that many people. By the way, there will always be a need for drivers in a hybrid environment. But there are enormous benefits in safety and efficiency. Now, there are many other remarkable technologies under development for us all to keep our eyes on. There are technologies such as quantum computing, advanced robotics, many advances in renewable energy, a lot of work in extended reality, which is artificial reality, virtual reality, etc. There is continued work in blockchain and the security that brings to decentralized finance. There's nanotechnology, precision medicine, and much more. Each of these is likely to change the way we live and work, and each of these could be the subject of a future talk one day here at the museum. But let me finish my remarks with a technology that has captured enormous attention of late, and this is AI, artificial intelligence. Why all the buzz? Artificial intelligence and machine learning have been around in various forms for a long time. But we are now witnessing something of a renaissance in AI, sparked by some recent high-profile advances in so-called generative AI based on large language models such as ChatGPT and others. Artificial intelligence is poised to revolutionize many aspects of our lives and our jobs. AI is now very much a work in process, and it is a competitive race, and will continue to evolve, leading to smarter automation, personalized healthcare for you and me, improved drug discovery, better logistics and supply chains, and countless other applications. Billions of dollars of new capital investment is now going into AI startups such as OpenAI, Anthropic, and many others, and also into specialized semiconductor production by companies like NVIDIA and Intel and others. But perhaps the most important space to watch is how AI is being deployed into new application by the so-called hyperscaler companies. That is, companies like Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon, Apple, and others. Since all the smart investment money now seems to be jumping on the AI bandwagon, it might be prudent for us to ask ourselves whether we're seeing something real or just another hype cycle. Could this merely be a bubble which might soon burst? Are we yet recreating another mass frenzy, like the Dutch tulip bulb scandal of the 1600s, or another debacle like the dot-com bust from a couple of decades ago? The noted American futurist Roy Amara, who has spent his life forecasting the effects of technology, is best known for Amara's Law. Amara's Law states, quote, "We tend to overestimate the effect of a new technology in the short run and underestimate its effect in the long run." And I think if you look at everything we've seen, this is very much true. Now, a lot of smart and well-connected people like Eric Schmidt, who's the former chairman of Google, think that the advent of AI is the real deal. He and others would tell us that the arrival of a new, non-human form of intelligence will be like nothing we've ever seen in the past. He believes AI is not being overhyped. He would tell you that if anything, AI is being underhyped. Now, I can tell you that all the companies I have been involved with, whether it's Uber, Apple, Chevron, Amgen, or Northrop Grumman, all of them are now deploying AI into the way they operate, create new products, and improve their customer service. Of course, as with any new technology advancement, there will also come significant ethical and societal challenges. As AI systems become more integrated into our daily lives, we must address issues such as job displacement, algorithmic bias, safety, privacy, legal risks, and something people had not anticipated, the need for massive new electric power consumption. Just as an example, on this last point, to train just one generated AI model, a large language model, consumes as much electric power as a small town uses in a month. And there are going to be many, many large language models. So ensuring that AI technologies are developed and deployed responsibly will be crucial to maximizing their benefits while minimizing potential harm. So the big question remaining is, will AI be a net benefit to mankind or a detriment? Only time will tell, but I'm betting we can look forward to a world where technology continues to transform our lives in unprecedented ways. So that concludes my remarks. Enjoyed being here, and I hope you found this interesting, and thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts and also take any questions you might have. I should ask who would like to ask the second question, because no one ever wants to ask the first question. So, yes, I have a question here. And I'll repeat the question so that it can be picked up on monitor.
Made reference to the future electric highway in the sky.
That's a great question. The question is, Cindy mentioned electric highways in the sky, the idea of electric vehicles that would basically provide taxi service aerially, and could I comment on how that might fit into the vision of the future? Well, of course, I don't have a crystal ball. I will tell you that at Uber, we spent a tremendous amount of money and time looking into electric helicopters and created the concept for how the network would work. We determined that we were not the company that was best positioned to actually develop the hardware, and so there are probably now about a dozen companies. You mentioned two of them, Joby and Archer. There's Lilium in Germany, there's Eve in Brazil, and there's probably a half a dozen others. The technology looks like it's feasible. And for those who are not familiar with it, what it is a helicopter has a problem in that if it's conventionally powered, it makes enormous amount of noise, and it's really not compatible with living in an urban environment. Even if it goes on the roof of a building, you still hear it. You all have helicopters flying around you all the time. I live near UCLA. I can assure you the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's been helicopters everywhere all the time. I can't imagine why. So, but the technology looks like it's feasible. It's battery operated. It looks like you can compress enough power into the batteries by weight so that you could then propel the various rotors, and there's different techniques here, very clever techniques with rotating wings, non-rotating wings, to allow you to vertically lift and go forward. The model we developed at Uber is that you'd want to operate from certain nodes, and the best nodes we thought were the roofs of parking structures, and that real estate you can get, and it's also an easy place to interface with a conventional Uber as well. And think about the cost per mile. We looked at studies that said you could probably, if you want to go from Yorba Linda to LAX, for example, on a cost per mile basis, probably competitive with ground, and probably save you an hour or an hour and a half. So we think it's coming. Different models are looking at different applications. I think Joby and Archer are looking at right inside the city. Lilium in Germany is looking at replacing the interurban train, you know, the 50 to 100 mile run. But I think, like all of these things, the technology will be out in front of the regulation and the ability to establish air traffic control norms at this altitude, which is below the normal air traffic control system. So I think time will tell. There'll be some experiments. Some things will go wrong. I think it's coming, but like all of these things, it's probably not coming quite as fast as we think. Yes, please.
I was very impressed to hear how large the capitalization of Uber was, 3 times General Motors for Uber.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm very surprised and disappointed to hear that. Maybe we should talk about offline. We provide that feedback. During COVID, we had issues like that because we didn't have enough drivers as people were coming back. The drivers were not coming back as fast. So I'll talk about that. The challenge is that in a conventional labor model, you feel like you need employment. Almost everybody who drives for Uber does not want to be employed. They want to be basically able to operate when they operate. They want to be able to go where they want to go. They don't want to work from 8 to 5. They don't want to be told when they have to be somewhere. And so it's an amazing model where it just kind of works. The marketplace takes care of it. Unfortunately, in many jurisdictions around the world, and I said we're in 70 countries, there are different views of how labor should be. And so you have this structural conflict between what new technologies can do to create empowered activity by people who want to drive, people who want to ride, and the conventional concepts of industrial employment. So we're sorting through all of that. In California, a law was passed by the legislature, strongly supported by organized labor, to force all Uber, Lyft, and other gig drivers to become employees and ultimately unionized. And that was certainly an intent that they felt was important. The Proposition 22 was brought and was summarily dismissed, that law. And by the way, 80% of the drivers voted to dismiss that law. So that's the thing. It'll be a continual struggle. There's going to be labor, regulatory issues in every jurisdiction, and we're going to sort it out. I think the important thing for companies like Uber and others is to make sure you give people an opportunity to get work and take care of them in a reasonable way, make sure they can drive safely. Most of the safety issues in ride sharing happen by attacks on the drivers, not attacks by drivers on riders. And that's something which we're looking at is how do you improve that without getting into people's personal privacy about do you have a criminal record or can you take an Uber if you have a criminal record. It's a new front, it's a work in process. Meanwhile, there is an enormous market demand for this everywhere. So, other questions? Yes?
What can you tell us about
hypersonic transportation? What can I tell us about hypersonic transportation? I can tell you I don't want to ride in one of those things yet. That's a little fast for me, but I'm old school. I think if you think about hypersonics, it is an extraordinarily important technology for defense, or offense, you could argue, because you can deliver a strike around the world a lot faster than you can do it with a conventional ICBM. An ICBM takes about a half an hour to get from here to somewhere in Asia or Eurasia. A hypersonic weapon would be faster. I don't see any market for humans going on hypersonic transportation on the Earth. I think potentially supersonic, but even that is proven not to be terribly efficient. There's been a couple of companies around, Boom is one of them, Ariane, another one. Some of you know these because you're airplane folks, that have been looking at supersonic business jets, supersonic transports. There's probably not a business case for a supersonic business jet. You don't have enough payload on it. There might be for a supersonic passenger jet, but the challenge there, of course, will be how do you make sure there's no sonic boom? You can't just go supersonic over water. You got to fly over land. And how do you make sure that the regulatory and time delays associated with being on the ground don't swamp the advantage of being able to whisk between two places when you get airborne? So I would say that while I'm a future guy and I love to talk about the future, I'm not sure I see that one coming that soon. Yes, over here.
Can you comment on the future impacts of fusion power?
So fusion power, can I comment on the future impact of fusion power? So a good friend of mine said that nuclear fusion is the technology of the future and will always be destined to remain so. That said, there have been some significant advances in fusion technology that may over time allow it to be applied for actual commercial use. And we'll see how that develops. But there's still a long distance to go between what we're seeing in laboratory experiments at universities and national labs and the ability to commercialize it. Perhaps closer in my judgment, is small modular reactors using conventional fission, nuclear fission, but doing it in a way now which is much safer, much more economical than the traditional old way we did it at places like 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl or whatever. And the idea here is that these are modular. They can be built in an area where the standoff area you need for safety is much smaller than for a conventional nuclear thing. And it is probably going to get something of a boost here from the creation of all the new data centers that are probably going to be required for processing large language models and generative AI, we think. And so you have the hyperscalers, these companies I talked about, you know, the big names I just mentioned, making separate arrangements with some of these fission small modular reactor companies. Can you build them for us as a bespoke private power source, because we cannot rely upon getting this power from the grid. And it's going to take years and years and years and this and that. If we can just put it here next to our data center, we're good to go. And these data centers, as I mentioned, take a lot. So fusion, maybe farther out. This is my opinion, of course. Fission, maybe closer in. Yes, way in the back.
Thoughts about hydrogen fuel for aircraft. What are your thoughts on hydrogen for?
So the question is, what are my thoughts about hydrogen fuel for aircraft? I think there's a lot of work being done in it. I would confess that I'm not as close to that. When I was at Chevron, we looked at a lot of work of hydrogen as replacing fuel, because as you know, when hydrogen burns with oxygen, it creates water. There's no CO2. So the question is, how do you get the hydrogen? The two challenges will be, how do you create hydrogen efficiently and cost competitively, because it takes energy to create hydrogen. And you want to do it without burning CO2. And the second problem will be, how do you store enough hydrogen by volume in an airplane to be able to have the amount of power you need to be able to make that airplane fly? Because today, using JP4, or one of the conventional fuels, it's a lot of power density in the fuel that flies planes like this. Hydrogen, not so much. So I think we're going to see continuing work there. Probably more likely near-term outcome will be using biological fuel stocks to create conventional jet fuel, but do it so that the creation of the fuel is going to be greener. And then the question will be, how do you burn it to make sure you don't have a huge carbon footprint? So again, hydrogen could be the future, maybe not Thursday. Okay. So. Yes, over here.
What about Amazon making deliveries to our door by air? Have you thought on that?
Yeah, you know, I think it's really cool. It's great articles, great PR for Amazon. Think about what makes Amazon actually work. What makes Amazon work is that the ability to concentrate massive amounts of stuff in these vans and be able to sequentially deliver to each one. Now think about the idea of individually having a drone with one thing on it that can go to your house and then come back and get one that can go to his house. And then think of the challenges associated with, as I talked about, air traffic control below 500 feet, where you've got to worry with this and power lines. So it's possible, it's feasible. They're doing it in a number of locations. I think there are some remote locations, perhaps rural or suburban, where that might work. It's hard for me to see that this becomes an economically viable replacement for what we're now familiar with large-scale delivery. By the way, everything I'm telling you here could be wrong, but just opinions. So. Yes, here.
Yeah, one of the things that has to be dealt with in the Amazon case is the sense of avoid, so we don't run into each other or other aircraft or whatever.
Yes. Yes, and the problem with it is even if Amazon puts, his question was, sense and avoid is probably one of the most important things you have to deal with these. The problem is, even if Amazon figures out with its contractors how to build the best little airplanes, you have the United States government, the local government, the state, working out different air traffic control, and this is all uncharted territory, and you know one thing is that it's not going to go quickly, and it's not going to go well. And so if you're building a business model based upon depending upon the bureaucratic process, you're probably going to be waiting a long time. So, yes. Here.
Talk about the bureaucratic process, switching gears to the military side. Where does the U.S. stand in terms of?
Yeah. So the question is, question is, where does the United States stand in applying technologies like AI and cyber relative to our adversaries? Did I capture that? So, look, I think that this is clearly on everybody's radar screen now, and you can argue that our serious adversaries have been investing a lot of money in this area. Certainly, China has put tremendous effort in this, and they have scale. They have a lot of people. They have a lot of ability to do this. They also know they have to have a qualitative advantage in the battlefield with us. We're doing it. I'd like to tell you that we're way ahead of everybody else. I don't have a reason to believe that. I have a reason to believe that we're like everybody else, working our way around. I think we're all watching the war in Ukraine to understand what new technologies are coming, what are the effects of some of the techniques being deployed. I think one of the big learnings for everybody was that you can deploy fleets of cheap drones with little bombs on them, and you can overwhelm air defense systems. And if you look at what happened in the tete-a-tete between Israel and Iran recently, what you saw was a massive attack by Iran on Israel, maybe 300 or 400 projectiles fired, a combination of drones and ballistic devices, pretty much all taken out. And on that hand, you'd say, great, that just shows you how good the United States is. We helped. how good Israel, they have a lot of technology. But if you think about the asymmetric cost of putting 300 drones against Israel versus the cost of the very sophisticated weapon systems they use with Iron Dome and other things that we use, it probably is not an economic ratio that can be sustained for a long war on a large scale. So a lot of work to be done there. But I do think that there is considerable need for, and in some cases a little bit of scariness associated with embedding AI into weapon systems. And why is that? Because the decision loop for weaponry before you get killed is probably, you got to do it before they get you, you got to do it before them. And in many cases, you cannot sense, process, and actuate fast enough if it's you. And just like we always have humans in a loop before we release weapons, even when we have drone attacks in Iraq, other places, it may be that you can no longer have that luxury, and that will create potentially an unstable battlefield situation. So I think that's the scary thing. And while we might want to put safeguards in place with our forces and try and do it right, you can't always guarantee the other guys are going to do it the same way. So I don't want to scare anybody here, but it's a scary future in that regard, I think. Yes, question here.
Where are we going and where are we right now? Is there places of AI and cyber technology?
I'm sorry, say that. Where are we with interfacing of AI and cyber technology? Yeah, so those are two important but somewhat parallel things. In the case of cyber technology, it's both offense and defense. That is to say, cyber can be used to attack you, and every company now, every organization needs to have safeguards against cyber attacks. Nobody wants to be hacked. Nobody wants to be extorted, and extortion is a huge use. And, with cyber, you have basically nation states who are there to basically take you out and kill you in warfare. You have criminal gangs who are there to basically take your money, extort it, what have you. And then you have kids in garages or basements who are doing it just for fun but can do amazing things if you're not careful. And so I think the challenge is when you now start using AI techniques and tools more broadly, could there be some cross-coupling between cyber risk and that? I think the answer is. And so security, safety, privacy become even more important. And again, this is a work in process, and we'll all see how it works out. Any of you see the Apple Worldwide Development Conference a video a couple of days ago? They came out, a couple of people did. What Apple is doing is trying to figure out how to take the advances that are now available in generative AI and other AI and make it particular to you on your devices using your information and try and keep it as private as possible. And if you need to use access to a bigger server, you do that by basically opting in as opposed to just having your data go to some server. That will be a model that will be tested in the business world. The initial returns are that we think this is going to be pretty good because people are going to want this. And probably 95% of all the things you and I are going to need generative AI to do for us is probably not going to require that massive data center that's connected to the Grand Coulee Dam, generating all that large language model stuff. So, but to make that work, you have to have security, cyber protection. Yes, here.
What kind of message do you have for us reducing traffic on the freeway?
Oh man, well, yeah, that's a real problem here in this country. What kind of message do I have for reducing traffic on the freeways? When I get home later today, I live in West, I'll give you a call and we'll talk more about it. But don't wait for me. Lots of challenges in any urban center. If you know the history of this place, which I've studied, some of you may or not been around here, LA had the most advanced urban electric interurban railroad system in the world. Some of you don't know that, but it did. And then after World War II, there was a growth spurt in which the interurban trains were basically knocked out, replaced by cars, freeways, buses, trucks, whatever. And that felt like a great solution for a while. And now we're seeing maybe not such a great solution. I don't know if there's an easy answer to that. Obviously, the more you can do by not going somewhere, the less driving. I've discovered that one of the great silver linings of COVID in my world is that I don't fly or travel to as many board meetings or other places as I used to because I'm doing so much more virtually. And if somebody says, I want to get together for coffee or I want to talk with you, Ron, when can we schedule it? I live in Chicago. I finally say, look, we'll just do a Zoom call tomorrow. How about 9 o'clock? And I'm doing virtually everything I can. Most of my corporate boards used to meet 5, 6 times a year, and you have to fly on an airplane to go there, and it's a 2 days deal. And now we basically, if it's a 6 board meeting a year company, it's now 4. 2 are done virtually. If it's 5, it's now 3. And so actually cutting out the need to travel is a smart thing. You can never substitute totally the need to be with people. Certainly when you're trying to create a culture in a company and you want to bring young people into your company, you want them to work with you, you want to have experiences with the older folks. There's no substitute for that, but you don't have to do it necessarily every day. Yes, please.
For some reason, I see an incentive model within the Uber and not a networking model that makes sense.
So the question is, what incentives would we have at Uber to get people to, I guess, distribute their ride demand over time? Well, there's 2 things. One is there is surge pricing when there's just too many people who need the asset. And that's just a simple marketplace response. Everybody hates it. I hate it. You hate it. But the fact is, if you want to go at rush hour somewhere and it's raining, the fact is there's 10 times the demand than there is the supply. So that gets solved by marketplace surge pricing. The other thing we're looking at is ride sharing, where you are willing to ride with somebody else if it's on the same way. We're looking at van stuff, and there's numbers of countries where, maybe not the US, where that works very well because people can't afford an individual car to take them somewhere. So a shared van ride, which goes along sort of pre-programmed routes and also ties into the transit system of that city. Again, that requires technology and interface and information use, but that sort of is the next step. So trying to solve those problems is part of the business model. Yes, right here.
You know, you were talking about using Waymo, and I noticed, like, traffic situations, you're gonna get more efficiency.
Yeah, so the question is, he sees with Waymo and with Tesla self-driving that there's differences in level of safety and experience and what have you. And so look, there's a number of companies that are moving forward on this very aggressively, including several Chinese companies we don't talk about because we'll probably not allow them to operate in the US because of our trade wars going on. The techniques that have been used by Waymo and Cruise, Aurora, and several others have been creating rules-based models which try to explain to the car what it's supposed to do when it sees this and that, and then going through driving millions of hours and millions of miles in real-life situations to see how that works. Tesla's taken a new approach recently, not on the old autopilot stuff, but that it says, I've got data now from millions of hours of Teslas being driven, because I've been recording all that stuff, of how real drivers drive in real situations. And wouldn't it be interesting to train an AI to use all that information to figure out what you should do to duplicate it, removing the cases where the person made a stupid decision and smashed into a car. Obviously, you have to remove those cases. Look, driving is not safe. There are, what, 50,000 deaths a year or something on that order. I don't know if it's that much today. Some may have a better number, but I remember there's many people who die every year from automotive accidents in the US without autonomous vehicles as died in the Vietnam War. So that's a lot of people dying. So it's not safe. It's inherently a risky business. Secondly, there's always going to be difficulties. Third, the interface between self-driving vehicles and humans is going to be weird, and it's going to create probably cases where the self-driving vehicles, if they were the only things on the road, would probably figure out how to all get along and respect each other. But you got you and me, and the guy is stopped waiting here, and we know they should go there, and I'll just go around him. You've seen that. Have you ever seen one of these vehicles actually operating? They have these little radars and lidars on the top, and they're sitting there waiting for something. You're not sure what they're waiting for, and you just want to honk them, but there's nobody in them, and you don't know what to do, so you feel you'll go around and take it out. I think we're going to figure it out. It's going to be messy. But over time, I think the large play is going to be toward a hybrid model of both self-driving vehicles and mostly now driver vehicles, but some self-driving as well. By the way, just so you know, I don't drive a Tesla, I drive a Lexus, and it's a wonderful car, and it has two self-driving features. One is it follows the guy, automatically to make sure, so I put that on there. And the other one it has is it steers to keep me in the lane, and I don't use that one. Because the first few times I used it, I was driving on one of our freeways here in LA, and you know how the bridge overpasses, they kind of come out, the center barrier comes out, and I discovered I was headed right to that barrier because it wasn't quick. And I said, okay, I got it, so don't do that. So, I know I have a friend who drives to West Los Angeles from Manhattan Beach every day, and he drives in rush hour traffic, and he reads a book. He's in a Tesla. I hope my friend is going to be around a long time. Yeah, maybe one more question if, yes, there you go. Quantum computing, what's the story on that? Another technology that was perhaps destined to be in the future. Look, I don't have a crystal ball here. There is clearly progress being made both in quantum computing and use of quantum technology for sensing and other applications. The promise of quantum computing is, of course, that because it frees you from zeros and ones, it can operate at levels of complexity that allow you to, for example, break cryptographic codes that cannot be broken today. And if you think about anything you think is secure with a cryptographic code today, might not be so in a few years if somebody with a quantum computer is going at it. Certainly the intelligence agencies in this country and our adversaries are working hard on it. Again, it's probably Amara's law here, which is we tend to overestimate the immediate impact of the shiny new technology. Then we go through a period of despair, disillusionment, and then suddenly, when we weren't looking, it's now become pervasive in almost everything we do. So, for example, going back to the original part of the talk where I talked about the 6 or so technologies which came together to allow us to do ride sharing, those were all shiny new objects, and they all went through a period of disappointment. And then today, we're all using them in ways that we don't even know we're using them. So perhaps the same will happen with quantum. So, okay, well, I think our time is up. Thank you all for coming down here on a Saturday morning.